Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel for a brand new mystery with Molly. If you are new around here, if you have never seen my face on your screen before, then hi, my name is Molly and I post true crime videos like this every single week. So if you think that is something that you might want to stick around for, then please do subscribe. And don't forget to switch on the little notification bell so that YouTube will let you know whenever I post a new video. But anyway, this week we are going to be talking about the case of Ebony Simpson. She was a 9-year-old girl who just suddenly disappeared one day when she was walking home from school. As soon as Ebony was reported as missing, the police jumped into action straight away and the search for her began. However, this missing persons investigation quickly took a very dark turn when her killer was apprehended and the horrifying truth about her death and the killer's movements after her death came to light. As upsetting as this case is, I really wanted to share Ebony's story with you guys today because I think that the work her family has done since her death is just incredible. So I'll be talking more about that towards the end of the video. So for today's case, we are going all the way back to the year 1992 in Bargo, which is a small, quiet town in New South Wales in Australia. And this is Ebony Jane Simpson. She was a 9-year-old girl who was born on the 22nd of December 1982 to her parents Peter and Christine Simpson. Ebony was one of 3 siblings. She had 2 brothers who were both older than her, and the Simpson family lived in a little farmhouse in Bargo, where Ebony had lived all her life. I believe the family moved to Bargo about 14 years before this case took place because Peter and Christine thought it was a nice area out in the countryside to raise their children. And when their youngest Ebony was born, it was like Peter and Christine's little family was complete. They were so over the moon when Ebony arrived. Ebony's mother described her daughter as just being really special. She was incredibly close with Ebony and she said that Ebony was just such a lovely and soft and kind young girl. And I'm sure her father felt the same way about Ebony. He says that he still cherishes the special memories he has of her to this day. Some of which being when he and Ebony just used to have cuddles. Ebony used to just sit on her father's lap and they would just hug each other and she used to play with his hair. I've got a quote from her father Peter here and he said, "My fondest memories of Ebony are of her sitting on my knee. She'd be playing with my hair and I just used to melt and love it like a dog." It makes me sad to think about those missed opportunities which I could still be getting. I'd still be getting those cuddles from my daughter. The day that Ebony Simpson disappeared was the 19th of August 1992. It was a Wednesday and so of course that means it was a school day for Ebony. So the day just started off as any other normal day. Ebony went off to school that morning and she had a good day. She got to school okay. However, later on that afternoon, she didn't return home. Now, Ebony got the bus to and from school every day and the bus stop that Ebony used to get on was really not too far from her home. It was meters away from her house. And usually every single day, Ebony's mother Christine would drop her off and pick her up from the bus stop. However, on this particular day, Christine was running a little bit late. She was out of the house that afternoon and she was sorting out some insurance stuff, and so she asked one of Ebony's older brothers if he could wait for Ebony when he got off his school bus that day. You see, he got a different bus to school every day because I think he might have gone to a different school to his sister, and so yeah, Christine just asked Ebony's brother if when he got off his bus he could wait at the stop for Ebony's bus and then they could both walk home together. And he obviously said yes, he was happy to do that, although his bus was actually running quite late that day, and when it finally arrived at the bus stop, Ebony's brother noticed that Ebony wasn't there, and so he just assumed that Ebony was at home. She had gotten off the bus and walked the short distance home on her own, and so he did the same. He walked home. However, Christine arrived home shortly after this, and as soon as she pulled up in the car, she knew that Ebony wasn't back because her shoes weren't outside the front door where she usually left them. So immediately alarm bells started to ring because Ebony wasn't home yet and she should have been home by now. And so Peter Simpson actually got straight on the phone and he contacted the police. Meanwhile, Christine just ran to the bus stop, but there was no sign of her daughter there, and so she continued looking around. She went along Bargo Road and Arena Road where Ebony would have walked to get home. She looked in the reek. She asked the neighbours if they had seen her, but no one had. It was literally like Ebony Simpson had just disappeared into thin air. Immediately, as soon as the police were contacted, they jumped straight into action as this was obviously very serious. A 9-year-old girl was missing. So detectives went to the Simpson home to speak with the family and get an account from them. They told the police that this was extremely out of character for Ebony. She wasn't the kind of child that would do something like this. She would always return home. Meanwhile, other officers began the search for Ebony, and it didn't actually take long for the police to receive their first reported sighting of her. Now, I'm not entirely sure who provided this first sighting of Ebony. I don't know if it was someone who was on the bus with her that afternoon or someone that was just near the bus stop, but whoever it was, they basically just told the police that they saw Ebony get off her bus at the bus stop and start walking in the direction of her house. It wasn't a massive lead, but it was confirmation for the police that Ebony was on her way home that afternoon. It wasn't like she got off the bus and just decided to go off somewhere else. She got off the bus and she intended to go home. So something must have happened to her on that short route home. And shortly after this lead, they received further information about Ebony's movements. This information came from an older man who had seen all of the commotion. He had noticed all of the police cars near the Simpson home, and so he went up to the officers and he just kind of asked what was going on, what had happened. And so the police informed him that 9-year-old Ebony Simpson had gone missing, and this older man said, "Oh, my 2 sons actually saw Ebony that afternoon." His 2 sons were 13 and 17, and I believe they were neighbours of the Simpson family. They lived close by and they were just driving down the road in their car that afternoon when they noticed Ebony on the side of the road walking in the direction of her home, and so they waved at her and she waved back. And as they continued driving, when they got to the corner of the road, which was not too far from Ebony's house, they noticed a yellow car. And this yellow car was parked on the corner on the side of the road with the bonnet up, and a man, presumably the owner of the vehicle, was just kind of standing looking into the hood of the car. So this was a huge lead for the police and a huge worry as well, because Ebony had to have passed that yellow car on her walk home. She had to have passed that man, that stranger, so it was looking likely that perhaps this man abducted the 9-year-old. So now not only were the police searching for Ebony, but they were also searching for that yellow car that may or may not have been related to this inquiry. By now, a couple of hours had passed since Ebony was reported missing, and by this point the police had set up a grid pattern for the search. So they planned to search all of the areas that were within miles of where she was last seen. They were searching houses and speaking to the neighbours and occupants of other houses that lived nearby, asking them if they'd seen anything. They were searching local dams and paddocks and wooded areas and bushlands, just everywhere they could think of. But by 9 p.m. that evening, there was still nothing. But people were not giving up. By this point, news of Ebony's disappearance had spread like wildfire. Everyone in the local community and surrounding areas were aware that a little girl was missing, and they all just wanted to help as much as they possibly could. And so now not only were the police out searching for Ebony, but so were members of the public. Hundreds and hundreds of people volunteered their time to help with the search, and the searches continued through to the following day. Meanwhile, as the searches carried on, detectives were obviously still speaking a lot to Ebony's family, just letting them know any updates about like how the searches were going, but also they still just needed as much information from them as possible. They needed to know like what kind of child Ebony was, and also whether anything significant or strange had occurred in the last couple of weeks in the lead up to Ebony's disappearance that could have possibly been related. So they asked Christine, Ebony's mother, if she had seen anything weird or suspicious recently in the area, and she said no, she couldn't really think of anything. And so the detectives just kind of rephrased the question and they said, have you seen anything? What have you seen lately? Have you seen any vehicles that you don't often see, or any people that aren't usually in the vicinity? And after thinking about it for a couple of minutes, Christine said, actually yes, I have recently seen a car just kind of hanging around the area, a car that wasn't usually in their area before. Christine said that in the lead up to her daughter's disappearance, she saw this car on 2 occasions, one of which was just 3 days before Ebony went missing. It was a yellow car that she had seen, a small yellow car, and both times that she saw it, it was parked not too far away from Ebony's bus stop, and a guy was just kind of stood next to it looking in the hood. So Christine just assumed that his car had broken down, and she even intended to stop and ask him if he needed any help with the car, although she never did. So now the police had received 2 statements, 2 sightings of this yellow car just hanging around the area where Ebony vanished from. And so the investigation from this point on was very much focused on this vehicle. The police were sure that it had to be related to the case. So with this information from Christine, the detectives went to speak again with the 2 brothers who had provided the first sighting of the car, the ones who saw Ebony walking along the road and then the yellow car parked ahead of her on the corner. And the brothers began telling the detectives in as much detail as possible what they could remember about the yellow car and the man standing next to it. They told the police that they thought the car might have been a Mazda 808. They said that the car looked as though it had some patchwork on the exterior. You could see where someone had painted a part of the car. It was near the front on the side, and they could even tell the detectives what exact colour paint it was. They thought it was yellow ochre, which is kind of like a mustardy colour. They said that the car had quite a lot of dirt on it. It was clear that mud had splashed up on it at some point, and they repeated the same thing that they said earlier, which was that the man that presumably owned the car was just standing next to it. The bonnet was up and he was just looking at the engine, and they also noticed that he had something black in his hand. By the 18-hour mark, so 18 hours since Ebony was last seen, the search for her had grown even more. There were even more police officers out searching for her, even more volunteers, and by now the media had picked up on the case and they were spreading awareness of Ebony's story in a desperate bid for help. And because so many people had joined the search for Ebony, the police actually split them into little like teams or groups, and each group was given a specific area to look for Ebony or any trace of her. Now, a few police officers that were due to be joining the search for Ebony that were coming from another town actually arrived a little bit late on the second day, so they missed the mini briefing that the detectives gave before all of the search teams split up. And so when they eventually arrived, the detectives just briefly told them what to be on the lookout for. Obviously Ebony, but also the yellow Mazda 808 car. And that was when one of the officers said, oh, like that car over there? And he pointed to a yellow car that was parked not too far away. And this car that he pointed to looked exactly like the one the witnesses had described. And so the officers went up to the car and just started having a look around it. Meanwhile, one of the witnesses that saw the car previously, Ebony's mother Christine, she sat down with another detective and they began coming up with a sketch or a photo fit of the man that she saw next to the yellow car in the lead up to her daughter's disappearance. So she described the man that she saw in as much detail as she could remember, and the photo fit of the suspect was created, and that is the picture on screen right now. The officer that created the sketch with Christine then took it outside and he showed it to his boss, the lead detective, I think, and immediately this detective was just stunned, and he said, "Oh my god, that's the guy that we were just talking to. It looks exactly like him." Whilst Christine was creating the composite sketch with one officer, the other officers that noticed the yellow car went up to it, they started looking around it, and they waited for the owner to return. And the guy did eventually return, and the police started asking him a couple of questions about his movements and his vehicle and stuff like that. They were wary of him at this point, but they weren't overly skeptical, because the only potential link he had to the disappearance of Ebony Simpson so far was this car, which just resembled the one that the witnesses saw, but it doesn't mean that this was the exact car that was seen. However, when the detectives saw the composite sketch of the suspect and they realised that the composite sketch looked very much like the owner of the yellow car that they had just spoken to, they became so suspicious. It just seemed like way too big of a coincidence. So they asked this guy if they could have a look inside the car, and he said yes, he was very cooperative with the police. He was willing to let them search it. In particular, they wanted to look inside the boot or the trunk of the car, just in case if maybe he was connected to Ebony's disappearance. Maybe she was in there in the boot, maybe her body was in there. However, when they opened it up, they quickly realised that she wasn't in there, and they didn't find anything alarming in there either, or in the rest of the vehicle. But the police didn't want to just leave it there. They wanted to examine the car further and conduct some forensic tests, and so they seized the vehicle and had it towed to a police station. Meanwhile, as all of that was going on, the police took the car owner to the police station too. They didn't arrest him just yet because, well, they didn't have enough evidence to arrest him, so they just asked him if he could come down to the station and answer a couple of questions, and he agreed. So he was taken to the police station and the questioning began, and again this man was really calm and collected. He didn't seem like he was that nervous, he didn't seem evasive, and so the detectives actually thought to themselves, maybe this isn't the guy we're looking for. Maybe he had nothing to do with Ebony Simpson's disappearance. Maybe it is really all just one big coincidence that he looked similar to the composite sketch and his car was similar to the one that the witnesses saw. But they carried on asking him some questions anyway, not just about this case, but also just about him, so that they could get a better picture of his background and his life and stuff. So this guy's name was Andrew Garforth. He was 29 years old and he was born on the 5th of August 1963. And at the time of this case taking place, he lived in Bargo with his wife and 2 children. They had moved to the area a couple of months before this case after previously having lived in Western Australia. And as far as the police knew at this point, he was a pretty normal guy. He didn't appear to have a criminal history. He wasn't known to the police in Bargo prior to this anyway, although I believe it was later discovered that he did have a couple of previous convictions in other parts of Australia, but they were for relatively minor crimes. Anyway, the interview continued. The police asked Andrew what he had been doing on the day of Ebony's disappearance, more specifically around the time that she vanished, and he told them that he had been to a hardware shop to pick up a few things. Then he went to a video shop. He told them which route he took to get to the shops, and he didn't mention Bargo Road or Arena Road, which is where Ebony was last seen, which actually the detectives did think was quite strange, because apparently from where he lived, the route that most people would usually take to get where he was going, the most direct route, would have been along Bargo and Arena Road. So they thought that that was a bit odd, and so they just asked him if he could recap, if he could go over his route again, and he did, but he completely changed it. This time he said that he did go on to Arena and Bargo Road, and so that means that he would have been at the place where Ebony disappeared from around the time that she disappeared. did. And then he went on to say that he did actually stop on the side of the road and he opened the hood of the vehicle, and the reason he did this, he said, was because he needed to put oil in his car. He was just talking the detectives through all of this. The interview was continuing as normal, but then this man, Andrew Garforth, just suddenly said something that completely stunned the officers, something that they were not expecting him to say.
And left onto Arena, right onto Bugger. I had the bonnet of the car up, I had the boot of the car open, and when the young girl was walking past the car, I grabbed her in the boot.
As calmly as ever and just completely out of the blue, he admitted to abducting 9-year-old Ebony Simpson. And then he talked the detectives through what he did afterwards, after he put Ebony in the boot. He said that he drove away and Ebony asked him if he was going to let her go, and he told her that he didn't know, he wasn't sure yet. And I actually read on one source that she was crying and she was hysterical and she was just asking him to take her back to her mum. She just wanted to be with her mum. I mean, you can't even imagine the terror that that poor girl must have felt. She was just innocently walking home from school, probably looking forward to getting home and seeing her family, and then she was just grabbed and thrown into the trunk of a stranger's car. I can't even begin to comprehend how scared she must have been in those moments. So now the detectives obviously needed to know where Ebony was at this moment in time. He had told them that he had abducted her, but what had he done to her after this? Was she still alive somewhere? Well, as they continued interviewing him, they soon discovered what happened, and it was not the answer that they were hoping for. Andrew Garforth told the detectives that he drove Ebony to a bush track, which was not too far away from where he had kidnapped her from, and when he got there, he got Ebony out of the boot of the car and he tied up her hands and her feet using some wire. He actually tied them up together. He tied her hands to her feet so she wouldn't have been able to move or walk, and then he described how he picked her up and just threw her into a dam. He threw her into the water while she was still alive and she drowned. And I read on a couple of sources that before he threw her in, he actually filled her little pink school backpack that she had on her back, he filled it with heavy rocks so that when he threw her in, they would weigh her down and he could be sure that she would drown. So now the police's main priority was going to the dam and retrieving Ebony's body, and they went there at 11 p.m. on Thursday the 20th of August, which was just the day after Ebony disappeared. At this point she had been missing for around 31 hours, so this investigation moved pretty quickly. Many police officers went to the scene and they actually took Andrew Garforth with them because they needed him to show them where exactly Ebony was, and the police were desperately hoping that by some miracle Ebony might still be alive when they found her. Maybe she didn't drown and was able to get to land, to the riverbank. They knew that the chances of this were very slim, but they were still just praying. However, when they got to the dam, they quickly realized that this would not be the case, because when they arrived, the first thing the officers saw was Ebony's little pink lunchbox just floating in the water. And they just knew, as soon as they saw the little pink lunchbox, they knew that Ebony was in the water. Before the police officers got into the dam and started looking for Ebony's body, Andrew Garforth stood at the edge of the dam with the detectives and he described how he threw Ebony into the water. And there is actually video footage of him doing this. He described just picking her up and chucking her into the dam, and he displayed absolutely no remorse whatsoever. It was honestly like he didn't care one bit. He didn't care that he had killed an innocent child. Following this, the rescue teams got into the water and they began looking for Ebony's body, and eventually they found it and they retrieved it. And after they retrieved it, the police had the horrible task of delivering the news to her family. They literally went to the Simpson house at around 2 a.m. that Friday morning and they told them the news, and of course the Simpson Simpsons were devastated, absolutely heartbroken. Her mother Christine just kept saying to the police, just let me hold her, please let me hold her body, because if I hold her and I hug her, she might come back to life. But of course the police couldn't allow Christine to do that because Ebony had been murdered. Her murderer, Andrew Garforth, was taken back to the police station after Ebony's body was found, and he was interviewed again at length about what had happened, and this time he added to his story. This time he admitted that not only did he kill Ebony, he also sexually assaulted her.
I took her up under the bank of the dam, tied her hands and her feet, pulled her pants down around her ankles, sexually assaulted her, picked her up and threw her in the dam.
So that confirmed to the police what his motive was for this horrific crime. Andrew Garforth was a paedophile and Ebony's murder was sexually motivated. And as I'm sure you can imagine, the whole community were just appalled and outraged. There were always like crowds of people just gathered outside of the police station where Garforth was being held, and as soon as he would come out, if the police had to like transport him anywhere and take him to a car, as soon as he would leave that police station, people would just shout and scream at him because they were obviously so disgusted. People were so angry and they wanted to kill him.
Keep looking over your shoulder, buddy. Tie his arms and legs and see how he goes. Come on, get him here now.
29-year-old Andrew Garforth was soon charged with the murder of Ebony Simpson, and a trial was due to take place. And in the lead up to the trial, the police got to work on collecting as much evidence as they could against him, just in case he decided to plead not guilty. And it was during this that the police discovered something very, very disturbing about Andrew Garforth's movements after he killed Ebony. Now, if you remember from earlier on in the case, the reason the police actually found Garforth was because his yellow car, the car that was seen by the witnesses around the area where Ebony disappeared, it was just parked on the side of the road when the search teams were out looking for her. And it turns out that the reason his car was there was because he had parked up and joined in the search for her. He joined in with the other searchers who had volunteered their time and effort to look for the missing 9-year-old. He was literally acting like he was this concerned member of the community that just wanted to help, when in reality, he knew exactly where Ebony was. He knew that she was lying dead in a dam. And all of those searchers and volunteers and police officers had absolutely no idea that they were standing amongst Ebony Simpson's killer. And you can actually see Andrew Garforth on the footage from the media coverage of this case, of the search efforts. He's just stood there with the other volunteers whilst the police were doing the briefing, which I think just highlights even more how sick and twisted this man was to join in the search for your own victim. It's just so chilling. I imagine he did it because he probably thought that if he joined in, it might make him appear less suspicious. Or maybe he did it because he just liked to see the pain that he had caused. He liked to see the worried community out searching for a girl that he had murdered. But anyway, going back, so like I said, in the lead up to Garforth's court proceedings, the police were working on collecting as much evidence as possible that linked him to the crime. Obviously, they already had his confession on tape, but they also wanted to obtain some forensic evidence. And when they examined his car, that's exactly what they found. In the boot of his car, on the surface of the inside lid of his hood, they found little fingerprints that were a match to Ebony's fingerprints, where she had probably been trying to push the boot open from the inside. They also found blonde hairs in the boot and a couple of Ebony's hairs were also found on Andrew's jumper, the jumper that he was wearing the day that he killed her. Additionally, shoe prints in the mud at the crime scene were a match to the shoes that Ebony was wearing that day, and I believe Andrew's shoe prints were also found in the mud at the scene. On top of that, they found a little bit of wool, like a strand of wool from Andrew's jumper, and that was discovered on a tree branch near the dam where Ebony's body was discovered. And they also found traces of Andrew's DNA on Ebony's body, I believe from where she had been sexually assaulted. So now they had a huge amount of damning evidence against Andrew Garforth. However, when it actually came down to it, they didn't really need to use this evidence to convict him anyway, because he decided to plead guilty to his charges, which wasn't too surprising. I mean, he had confessed, so pleading not guilty would have been very, very pointless. So he just admitted what he did, and in 1993, the following year after Ebony's murder, he was sentenced to life in prison. And in this case, life meant life. There was no minimum sentence, there was no eligible for parole in so many years. He was going to die in prison because of the danger that he posed to children. From what I can gather, he has tried to appeal his sentence at least once, but of course this was denied. And unbelievably, a couple of years after Ebony's murder in 1995, he actually applied for victims' compensation because he was attacked in jail a lot, as paedophiles often are. They are regularly attacked by the other prisoners, and that is exactly what happened to him. And one of the attacks was so bad that he lost hearing in one of his ears. And so after this, he requested that he be compensated for the abuse that he had suffered. He made several victim compensation claims, and one of them was actually successful. But there was so much public outrage about this, understandably, and so it was reviewed and withdrawn. He never received a single penny. But I just think it's insane that he even applied for it in the first place. He literally killed someone. He killed a child, and he applied for victim compensation because he got beat up in prison. But anyway, moving on from him, now I want to tell you guys a bit more about what Ebony's family has done since her death and all the amazing things they've achieved. In the aftermath of Ebony's murder, her family decided to turn their anger towards this whole case into something positive. As horrific as Ebony's death was, they wanted something good to come out of it. They felt like something needed to change in the way that the families of victims are treated and taken care of in the aftermath of the crimes. Because after Ebony's death, the Simpson family actually tried to get counselling for their grief, but no counsellor wanted to take them on. They just thought it would be way too hard to counsel them. And so they received no support really for their grief, and they didn't want that to happen to other families of homicide victims. They wanted to help other families that were going through or would go through in the future what they had to go through and what they experienced. And so they set up an organisation called the Homicide Victim Support Group in Australia. The group was founded in 1993 alongside Gary and Grace Lynch, who were the parents of Anita Cobby, another victim of homicide. I've never actually covered the Anita Cobby case, but it is a very famous one in Australia, so definitely let me know if you would like to see a video about her story. But yeah, the Homicide Victim Support Group was set up by the Simpson family alongside Anita Cobby's family, and the group's aim is just to simply help. Like I said, they just want to help other families that are going through what they went through. So they offer a range of support services. They offer counselling and therapy, they have telephone support lines, they offer support for any children who have been affected by homicide, perhaps like in this case where a child loses a sibling to homicide. Obviously Ebony had two older brothers who lost their sister, so they have counselling for children. As well as that, they also offer advice when it comes to dealing with the media after a murder, because as we know, the media can be very invasive when it comes to these kind of criminal investigations. But as well as all of that, Ebony's family also set up a recovery centre called Ebony Ebony's house, and it was set up as a tribute for Ebony. Ebony's house is basically just a place where those who have lost a loved one to murder can go to, again, just get some support and grieve in private. As it states on the website, the purpose of Ebony House is to give people affected by homicide a place to go when they feel overwhelmed with everyday life. The work that Ebony's family has done since her murder is honestly truly remarkable and inspiring, and they're still doing all of that work today. According to their website, they currently have over 4,000 members of the homicide victim support group, which is heartbreaking that that's such a high number, but it's also incredible that there is a place that people can go in New South Wales in Australia if they have had to go through the trauma of losing a loved one to murder. And I think that Ebony's family should be so proud of everything they have achieved in her name. I will leave a link to the homicide victims support group website in the description box if you would like to just learn more about it, or if you would like to make a donation to the organisation. They do accept donations to help fund the services that they provide. So I'll also leave a link to their donation page in the description box. If you are in a position to be able to donate, even if it's just a small amount, I'm sure it will still make a huge difference and mean so much to the families that the organisation supports. But yeah, that is it for this case. That is the case of 9-year-old Ebony Simpson. This was a really difficult one to research and to film, but I hope that I did Ebony's story justice. As always, please do let me know your thoughts and opinions on this case in the comments. Also, let me know of any other cases that you would like to see me cover on this channel. Thank you all so much for watching. Please do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you again next week for another mystery with Molly. Bye!